Welcome to Entrepreneurs, Executives, and Eccentrics, a podcast dedicated to the stories, strategies, and secrets of remarkable individuals. Join us as we engage in enlightening conversations with intriguing entrepreneurs, accomplished executives, and fascinating eccentrics, exploring their journeys, triumphs, and the unconventional wisdom that has shaped their success. In this episode, we talk with Haleh Shoa, founder of Picturli, a studio that organizes and archives photo and video collections for families globally. We discuss what happens when decades of images pile up across boxes, hard drives, and disks. Haleh explains why order matters before digitization and how memory shapes what people choose to keep. She also shares how her family history led to the work and how the business has evolved over time.
Hello, Haleh. Tell me who you are and what you do.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm Haleh, Scott, and thank you so much for having me. I own a photo and video organization and archiving studio in Los Angeles, and we serve clients globally.
Okay, so just 10,000 foot view. People have a box. They have thousands of photos that they inherited from their parents, their grandparents, on and on. And you kind of centralize. You take that through the mail, and then you scan train scenes of automobiles. So tell me how that kind of works.
Yeah, so we organize everything chronologically so that when we digitize it, we rename and redate the files. And the redating is what makes it sortable and searchable. So if you're giving me a photo of your 17th, year of life with your grandmother, that photo will then be named and dated to that event.
Okay. Yeah. Because chronologically speaking, right, it means a lot less. Well, it'd mean a lot more if you understood the kind of order of stuff, because you can't necessarily go by the way they look.
Can you imagine giving me 5,000 photos and everything is dated October of 2025? You would want to pull your hair out.
I don't have any hair, so there's that. No, it is. It's right now. I probably have a huge box, right? Literally as big as like a trunk. My wife's stuff is probably another trunk. And it's unusable. It's unexperienceable. You can't experience it because it's so many photos.
Yeah, and that's it. It's about experience it, and it's really about reliving our story again so that we can tell our kids about it, be able to share it with our friends that we went to school with. And I'm talking to people who went to school with people when there was analog photos. I'm not talking to the 17-year-olds who I'm guessing are maybe not listening to this podcast anyway. But yeah, it's all about that. But that's not where we stop. So we do actually a lot of digital organization. As you know, in the mid-90s, we were introduced to digital cameras, but we still needed to have that analog photo in our hands. And we didn't really have a place to put those digital assets. So we have a lot of CDs and DVDs that were made at the time. We could have swirled it on different computers. So we come in and consolidate all that. So you can have a very nice, healthy digital library of all your assets.
I don't know where this came from, but they say you die twice, right? You die a physical death, and then the last time your name is uttered on the earth, right? And that's very dark, right? It got super dark there for a moment. But I think photos keeps that from happening.
Me, so I'm not scared of death.
Indeed, but what I'm saying is that the photos keep that memory and that human, I guess, in the live, forever, right? If it's kind of kept around. How did you come to the thesis of this organization? How did you come up with this idea?
Yeah. So it was several things. One was that my family left Iran during the revolution, and they didn't really have a lot of time for planning, even though we did leave on airplanes, but we weren't really able to take much. But my mom brought all the family photos with her. And in my mid-20s, I started to archive all of that, and I learned how to archive everything. I didn't know how to organize, so I have actually redone my entire collection twice, because it's much easier to organize first and then scan things. But so that was one reason, because I have family in 4 continents, and I was able to share those assets with my entire family, and they were amazed by it. And so that was one reason. Another was that I worked in advertising and I really understood digital asset management, and I was really able to handle the massive amounts of digital assets that we've amassed in the last 30 years or so, and be able to make sense of it and take out the duplicates and do all that. That's also really overwhelming for people.
Especially if you've lost a lot of family, especially if the photos really are all you have, you know. Okay, so you have the kung fu in that you understand the value, you understand kind of the process. Now, is this still a very manual process, have you somehow used anything kind of technologically advanced to kind of scan through these, or how are you doing this?
We manually organize everything because there's no amount of AI or machine that can look at the analog photos and know, what we need to keep, what we need to. I mean, of course, we use AI for facial recognition, but that's been around for over a decade.
Right.
So that's that, and that comes at the end anyway, right? But in terms of like curation, it's very much a manual process, and it happens with us interviewing our families to get a sense of what they want to curate. I have families who only want to keep 5%, and I have families who want to keep 90%. And a lot of times the latter is really trauma based. So let's say mom died really suddenly and they just want to keep everything that has mom's handwriting on it. I had a client who wanted us to scan receipts with his mother's handwriting on it. And so I don't think that's necessary. So we sort of coach. I basically do the coaching. We coach our clients through what really would make sense for them to visualize what their grandkids should be having. And a receipt with someone's handwriting on it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's okay. So you were doing it for yourself, you're doing it for another company. You had an idea. Like, where did that first paying customer come from? I kind of like, I imagine you see the value, obviously, right? It's obvious from almost every direction. It's valuable, but then you're like, oh, how do I charge this? What's the process? What's that very first customer look like?
My very first customer was actually not even an what we call an ideal client. She had over 130,000 photos and she wanted to us to yes. And that's not actually that rare. My client 2 months ago, I had to order a bobtail truck to get their stuff to the studio. I mean, it was insane. But my very first client had an enormous amount of assets, analog, spanning over 110 years. And we went through and organized everything in about 2 or 3 weeks. But that's not really what she wanted. She wanted us to sit there and scrapbook with her, which isn't something that we do. But being that it was the first client out the gate and I wanted to kind of learn how to deal with clients and how to charge and, do all that, we worked with her for 5 years. And yeah, 5 years into it, she got one photo book out of it. She actually passed away in the middle of it. So the project went on hold for about a year and then her daughter picked it up. But but that was the first client out the gate. And, my second and third client have incredible stories, one of whom is an African American, and he's also a historian. And he had photos from the 1800s, which is super rare for African Americans to have assets from the 1800s. So we worked on his grandfather's letters to his grandmother, and he decided to donate them to the Schoenberg Institute. Well, 3 weeks later, they called him and they said, another family has donated letters to us, and it's your grandfather. And apparently, he was in love with another woman. I mean, like, you can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff up. It's just
But
so.
you also would never uncover it. That would have never been seen the light of day if it wasn't for that type of, you have to wonder. As you were talking, I was literally just thinking, I'm sure there's pictures of my grandfather, grandmother that I'll never see. I'll never see because I don't know who it's at. They happen to be in, over for whatever, and there's millions of possibilities out there, but that's one in a million.
I know. It's so rare and so fascinating. But
Okay.
yeah,
So now you've got two, you've got three. Now you start to see that there's money in, money out. There's a flow of business. So when do you hire your first employee?
I hired my first employee kind of a year in. So I worked in advertising. I had a big girl job in advertising. I came up with this idea and I thought, okay, I'm going to just transition out. And as I was building this business and I was trying to transition out, I got a job to be a director of operations for Jaguar Land Rover globally. couldn't really say no to that. So the business was taking off and I was doing this global projects. So I had to hire someone in order to do the more of task oriented things that I'm not really good at anyway. Like I know how to do it, but it's not my zone of genius, if you will. I'm more strategic and I'm better doing more planning and strategery stuff, if you will. So yeah, and I hired my first employee and then it became two. And 2 years ago I had 13 employees and then I had to pare down because it was just too much the growth was just insane. And I actually decided to pare back a little bit and be a little bit more like just to kind of see the projects I wanted to take on. I wasn't saying yes to every client and every project.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I've heard that version of business a couple times where it gets too big. You're like, what am I doing? And why don't I just work on stuff that I really enjoy or I really think will make a difference? And then saying no is super powerful, right? Because you're like, well, I just raise my price, and just start saying no to some people, and then things. Now you have less stress. And you're actually making more money.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's the scariest thing. There's so many scary things when you're building a business, as I'm sure you've heard with all your interviews, but it's the scariest thing to say no to a client because you never know when the next one and where they're going to come from, right? And I still don't know. Like when people find me, I'm like, how did you find me? I still want to know how people found me because, I'm not we're not we're not a household name, A, and B, the vertical isn't really known, right? So people don't know that there are actually like professional certified photo managers out there. So it's not something like I could say I'm a real estate broker and everyone knows what it is. You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So you built it up. You got too much. Pulled it back down. What would you do if you could go back? How long have you been in business, first of all?
I started this in 2016, 9 years.
Okay. What would you do different? If you could go back to 2016, you're like, stop, 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 stop. Do this, do that. Hire the person earlier, later, whatever. What would that be?
I would do marketing earlier. I would, marketing, but and even ironically, I worked in advertising, but I'm like an executive producer. You give me something to produce and I can produce the hell out of it globally. But in terms of like actually marketing to families or marketing to institutions and that mechanic, it wasn't at all something I was familiar with. So I sort of shied away from that for a long time and until it just became obvious that I have to put some money towards marketing. And and so I would do that sooner than later and just really invest in the business. I invested in equipment. Like that was never a question. I always had the top of the line equipment. But I was raised in environments and in advertising where we only ever had the best of the best equipment. So, but yeah, I would say the marketing piece.
So was mom and dad entrepreneurial? That's the other thing I've started. So no.
No, my dad is more of a Renaissance man. He was the first in his family to graduate from college, and he was the first in his family to get a PhD, the only person in his family to get a PhD. And my mom got her bachelor's degree in her 30s, and with the encouragement of my dad. My parents have been now married since 1959. How many years is that? A lot. And they're still both with us. So even though I am very passionate, I have my sense of humor and my joie de vivre from my parents, they were not entrepreneurs, but they actually were forced into entrepreneurship when we left Iran. My father owned the largest pharmacy in Tehran and he had a thriving business, but it was really born out of the need of society it's a pharmacy. Everybody needs that. And when he came here, they didn't accept his license, so he was a dry cleaner. Sort of that immigrant story of why do you drive a taxi if you have your PhD in whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a time when we were actually had taxis, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a taxi and it's some guy from Brazil. He's like, in my country, I'm a doctor. Like, what are you doing here? It's like, there's no money there. I had to go take 12 tests to go become a doctor again and all this stuff. And or I'm an architect in Iran. and I kid that the license doesn't transfer, and it's a story after I've heard it a couple times.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So what is the future of this? Right? Do you take a step back, or do you scale it? Or are you just kind of taking it as it comes? Or what's the plan?
That's a really good question. I do want to scale it a little bit bigger. I do want it to be more, you know, more well known, but not necessarily a household name. But I want people to understand that this vertical exists, whether they hire me or hire another certified professional photo manager. That there's people out there that can help you take out the overwhelm of your digital and analog assets. And global warming is a real thing. No matter where you live, you're going to have, we had the fires in Los Angeles in January, and it's to this day, it's absolutely devastating. And, you're in Florida for most of the year, and you guys get a lot of water damage that comes your way. And it's not going away. It's just going to get worse. And your photos are worth it. So make sure that you get them archived and you get them organized. But best of all, it's not just coming out of fear. It's something that you should do so you can enjoy and share it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's right now. If the photos I have disappeared, my son would have zero of archive of my family, of where we came from, or my wife came from. She just wouldn't have anything of the actual analog versions. So what I find interesting though is you go from analog to digital back to analog, because you've got a couple different versions of your product. Let's talk about that just for a second. And also the other question, what it would after that is along the lines of, did that organically happen? Did you see those services early, or that kind of happened, late?
Yeah. So the heart of why I started this was because I absolutely love doing the photo books. I design amazing, incredible photo books for any occasion. And I'm like, everyone's going to want to hire me to do their photo book. and and so when I went into it to do a photo book, they're like, well, what about all these photos? And what about my digital? And it was learning all of that other stuff that most people need. Not everyone wants a photo book, but everybody needs their items organized and archived and accessible and sortable and searchable, right? So the idea of the analog to digital back to analog is that, photos take up a lot of room. And I have some clients who throw everything away, even the old stuff. So they want it archived, but then they want to be able to look at it and feel it. So then they order digital books, which take up so much less space than the actual photos. And that is the idea of the sort of the circle of life of a photo
Right. Yeah,
becomes
because what's interesting is that that goes somewhere, right? I literally I reached the upper element of my Google Images folder. Like, it seems like every 6 months, like, well, you're gonna have to delete something, or you're gonna, you're at 99% or whatever. And if I just had that in a giant, like, 2 or 3 photo book, I'd be done. Like, I'd have everything I wanted. There's a bunch of stuff I don't need. It's a matter of kind of getting through it.
exactly. That's right. And so, we're working on a collection right now where 75% of what we picked up is just digital photos because the family just kept printing the digital photos. So we're talking about like 30 photo albums that are super thick. And, for me to design a digital photo book, meaning design it digitally, print it, I can fit like 300 to 500 photos in a photo book, which takes up a lot less space. It's more of a coffee date table thing. It tells more of the story. It's more interesting than just a bunch of 4x6s.
So, okay, so what's interesting, so I see that you've trademarked your company name, right? And typically that is along the way. Someone's like, if you want to sell this to private equity, you're going to want to own all of your intellectual property. Is that ultimately the future? Is that you make this into a a little bit larger organization? You get it sanded down, standard operating procedures. That way, someone can buy it, or is that having occurred to you yet?
Yes. I mean, as someone who worked in operations, I always advise all the heads of state when they hired me to think about the future of how they envision sort of assets being managed and how they want it to be organized and how they want to access everything. So it's with that in mind that I'm growing this company, is that so that I could hopefully hand over the keys to someone and not just shut it down. So definitely, I do want to be able, I want Picturli to live on and be a beacon of light for people to be able to, preserve their story and preserve them. And hopefully someone can do much greater things with it than I can. We're all limited.
Yeah, and they what do they say that typically the captain you leave with will not be the captain you arrive with, in the new world, right? So
Yeah.
you probably need a um a CEO that has scaled, right? Because not everybody has gone to the next level, that next step. And if you can find someone who's, oh yeah, out of zero to your bottom line, right? That's probably the person you're kind of going to go with. Is that our skill sets are very different. Building is very different than scaling.
Yeah. I mean, in this particular business, the only way to scale is to hire more people. The only way to hire more people is to get more clients in. And then so you have to have the space because we're dealing with assets, physical assets. And
Right.
so, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is a limitation in it. Because if you've got 100 clients tomorrow, you couldn't even service them.
We do have quite a big studio, but 100 clients, no. 10 clients, yes, but not
Right.
100. Yeah,
Yeah, and that looks like this as opposed to like that, right? And
that's right.
typically, when these companies want a hockey stick, right? It goes straight up, and that
Yes,
takes a lot of room for what you
yeah,
do.
that's right. Another way to scale it is to have more locations, so I can have so sort of branch out and have a location in San Francisco, have one in New York, and that way I'll be able to service more analog clients locally. Although a lot of people put their things in a box and ship it away, but it's really difficult to ship like a truck full of stuff to someone. It's really hard to do that.
You have a very cool business. I mean, I've interviewed probably 80 or 90 people in the last year, and I've heard of many variations of a service, right? Or typically it's some kung fu someone has that you can't hire for full time, so you have to fractionalize it, and that fractionalization is expensive, as an example. And then you hire someone, you teach it to them, and it slowly scales. But typically, you start hitting a ceiling, right, when you get X amount of clients per month, and you're just kind of bumping up against it. And it sounds like you're I don't know. It sounds like a franchising model maybe in your future
Yeah,
because
I
it
mean,
kind of works.
if anyone's listening to this and want to talk to me, reach out because I'm willing to talk to anybody about this.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I've got a guy or two you should probably meet.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. Thank you very much for doing this. You have a really cool business, and thank you for kind of training us up on it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.